So I want to welcome everybody today to our Business Preparedness and Resiliency Forum. Typically, we would offer this in person, but due to the current state of the world, we wanted to offer this online as it is our favorite time along the Grand Strand hurricane season. But if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that disaster comes in a lot of different forms. So we really wanted to look at preparedness and resiliency, specifically within the business industry here along the Grand Strand, and some of the great resources and businesses here that can offer advice and help in the event that we do have a disaster. A little bit of housekeeping. If you are watching on the Zoom and have a question, feel free to put that in the chat or the question and answer. Our panelists can answer that either during their quick little speeches that they're going to give us regarding their industry, or at the end when we have a Q&A. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to put any questions in the comments and I will relay them over to our panelists. We have a great lineup today. We have Courtney Frappaolo with the Horry County government. She is the Community Development Director. We have O'Neill McCoy, the Vice President of McGriff Insurance. Ed Piotrowski, the Chief Meteorologist at WPDE. Elaine Reynolds with Synergi Partners, the National Sales Manager. Randy Webster, the Assistant County Administrator of Public Safety for the Horry County government. And Todd Wood with Impact Myrtle Beach. So it has been requested that we have Randy and Ed follow up at the end to complete this presentation. So O'Neill, do you want to kick off with your short little presentation?
You got it, and I'll keep it short and sweet. As Caroline mentioned, my name is O'Neill McCoy with McGriff Insurance. A couple things I wanted to talk to everybody about today in terms of preparedness and resiliency. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about it from a storm perspective as we prepare for any upcoming hurricanes, but also obviously with the pandemic being fresh on everybody's mind, just want to kind of give a couple updates on the insurance market. So from a storm preparation and resiliency standpoint, I think it's these couple of just best management practices and things that we've seen through previous storms. First and foremost, remember, if a hurricane comes through and causes damage to your property, it's going to be incumbent upon you to prove your loss. So the easiest thing you can do to be prepared for a storm is to take pictures and a video of your business, of your property, because if something is damaged, when the adjuster is assigned, you have a cataloged video right there that shows them everything that you have. Easy to do. Most people don't do it. Something very important to do. The next thing, and this seems very simple, but have a conversation with your agent in terms of how do you file a claim? Because if we get hit with a Cat 5, your agent might be working remotely, might not have access to a computer. So make sure you have a copy of your policy on hand. So if you can't get in touch with your agent, in your policy, you will actually see information listed where you can file a claim directly with the carrier. Very simple blocking and tackling, but something that's very important to have. And the third thing I would say, as you go through a claim, and I don't think we have anybody on the panel, but I would be, from an insurance perspective, your most valuable partner is going to be your restoration contractor. So I would highly encourage every business to reach out to a restoration contractor here locally to develop a relationship so that when there is a storm, you have somebody that you can call. Because that restoration company is the one that's going to be the go-between between you and your insurance company and the adjuster. And they are invaluable to you, the process of getting you back up and running. One thing, after Hurricane Matthew, if everybody will remember, although it was a Category 1, it caused significant damage to our area. And we had national restoration companies that came in from all over to help. And what I would tell you is, on the front end, it is your duty, if you have damage, to take every step you can to mitigate that damage. So if you've got water, you're going to have a restoration company in there drying it out, taking care of it. It's incumbent upon you to do that, which is fine. What happened is we had some companies that came in and kind of strong-armed some clients to sign contracts, not only for the mitigation side, but the repair work. And what we found out was these contracts, the rates that some of these companies were charging were above market. So as an insurance company, they're only required to pay market rate for things. So the recommendation is yes, go ahead and get a restoration contractor then to do the mitigation, the cleanup, and so forth. But when it comes to repair and reconstruction, you need to have that restoration contractor or contractor you're choosing work with the adjuster before you sign anything. Because what happened in a number of these claims, they signed it, the work was done, the adjuster got the estimates and the work and said, this is more than you should have been paying. And there were some lawsuits that came forth from that. So just when it comes to the repair side, I would make sure that you are communicating with that adjuster and the restoration contractor before you sign any type of contract for the repairs. Two other just things to mention from the storm side of things is if you're a business and you're claiming business income, you know, obviously it's very easy when a wall's been knocked down and this is the cost to fix it. It's a lot easier to kind of go through that adjusting process. But when you're claiming business income for your loss of income, just keep in mind that that can be a very slower process, because when you get into accounting, it takes a lot longer. So we did sense some frustration from clients going through these things because that was not taken care of as quick as maybe just the physical property damage. And also keep in mind, if we get hit with a large storm, your adjuster, typically it might be 48 to 72 hours that one gets assigned. It might take weeks before you get an adjuster to come out there. Perfect example back in, was it 2017, Ed, when we had Harvey, Irma, and Maria?
Yes.
17. So if you think about it, a lot of these insurance companies use a lot of the same adjusting firms, and they're bouncing from storm to storm to storm. And you never know where your adjuster might come from. Just from Hurricane Matthew, I dealt with adjusters from Puerto Rico, from California, from Connecticut. And they didn't all get there in 48 to 72 hours. So just understand, if we get hit with a large storm, that process can be delayed. So I know it's not a time you want to exercise patience, but it does take some time. That's kind of it from on the storm side. I did want to hit on just two quick things from this pandemic. Just like every business, insurance is being affected tremendously from the ongoing pandemic. And from a business standpoint, there are a couple of coverages that have really been affected and wanted to mention them. The first is employment practices liability, and the second is cyber. So employment practices liability, as a refresher, protects you from claims from employees for sexual harassment, wrongful termination, failure to promote, failure to hire, discrimination. You can imagine with the pandemic, with people, mass layoffs, bringing some people back, not bringing some people back, having a second round, you can imagine that it has opened up a litany of claims. And they've seen more claims this year they have in years combined in the past. So as a business, just keep in mind, as you're dealing with your employees, if you're going through layoffs and you're going through work changes, just make sure you take into consideration how that's being handled, because that is a hot topic right now. The second one is cyber. Cyber, just 3 or 4 years ago, became the hot button in insurance. I'm sure everybody's read about the big Target breaches, and everybody thought, hey, from a small business, why are they going to really come after me? It's not a big deal. Well, what we have seen, especially with this pandemic, what used to be a supplemental coverage for people has now become a necessity. With this pandemic, everybody's working remotely. Everybody's working from home. So it has opened the doors for these hackers for ransomware, social engineering, phishing scams. Because they found out from a small business perspective, most small businesses don't have procedures in place to mitigate cyber claims. They also don't have the technology, the firewalls and stuff that these big corporations have. So they are becoming the hot button or the hot target for these hackers. So as a small business, if you have people working remotely, make sure you put in procedures in terms of how they handle anything received electronically. So those are big two things: the employment practices liability and cyber. Other sectors in the insurance market have been affected, but those are two of the major ones. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, O'Neill. Let's see. Elaine, would you like to give us an update on your end? Elaine, you need to turn your mic off, or on, excuse me. You're still off. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I thought I was through my phone. I apologize. So I wanted to talk a little bit about both disaster and COVID. Like O'Neill, with the pandemic, it's changed things up a little bit. But I'll first talk about disaster. So what I'd like to talk about is what happens after disaster. The federal government tends to pass legislation that allows tax credits for businesses that are in impacted zones. These credits are not well known to the business industry as a whole, but they are eligible if they're in a FEMA declared zone. And businesses can receive up to $2,400 in tax credits for employees that they retain after being impacted by a hurricane or any other natural disaster, because there's Midwest disasters, California wildfires, for example. And it reduces the federal tax liability for the company. That is important because if you're impacted by a disaster, you may be having expenses that you wouldn't typically have. And so being able to reduce your federal tax liability is a positive for your company. What I would say is important, really when at the impact of the storm, is really record keeping. A lot of this legislation does not get passed for some time after the hurricane. So, for example, Hurricane Florence that impacted Horry County in 2018, the legislation for these tax credits did not actually pass until December of 19. So, a good year and a quarter past the impact. So when a company, has to go back and think about, how was I really impacted by this storm financially or operationally? When did I close for the evacuation? When did I reopen? Those are all details that you really need to be able to maximize these credits for your business. So what I would say the most important part in preparing is really record keeping. Just because the legislation, there's a great lag time in getting it passed, record keeping is important because, your memory, you remember the storm, you kind of remember the impact, but you don't know the details. So I would say if you're not, and believe it or not, sometimes companies don't file insurance claims. So if you don't have that claim as the source of record, you really need your own personal records that you've kept as far as expenses and things like that. So that is important in order to maximize the credit for the business. And as I said, these are federal tax credits. Moving over to COVID, very similar to disaster, there's tax credits available to businesses that reduces federal payroll tax deposits. So it's very similar to disaster. It just, you're able to get cash in a different way through these COVID legislation. So under the CARES Act, for example, there was an employee retention tax credit in that particular legislation. So I would say that it's about retaining employees because these bills are passed really to compensate businesses that have been impacted by a disaster, yet have remained in business, have remained, kept their employees working, which is important, to drive the economy, which ultimately that's what the federal government wants, of course. So they're really incentivizing businesses to retain their employees. So with COVID, of course, it's had a significant impact, especially in Horry County, because it's primarily hospitality and it's really taken the brunt of COVID. But there are, along with the PPP, which I think everyone is familiar with, along with that, there also is some opportunity for tax credits that are pretty lucrative. So I would say that very similar to disaster, just record keeping, knowing when, you closed your dining area for in-room dining, things like that, just little details that you would not think are that important later on may very well be important in determining what the credits may look like for your business. And that concludes what is available after storm. or after COVID. Hopefully it'll go away soon too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that quick update. Todd, are you ready to go?
Absolutely. My name is Todd Wood, and I've served here for the last 20 years, living here in Horry County. About 15 years ago, I had the privilege to meet with Randy Webster and with our emergency management office, kind of share with them about the volunteer recovery groups that I have worked with in the past and what we could possibly bring to the table here in Horry County to assist so many businesses and families when we have disasters. I work with a lot of groups, the Baptist, Methodist, Mennonite, Presbyterian, God's Pit Crew, Samaritan's Purse, a lot of names you may or may not be familiar with from all over the nation that are large groups that we can come in. We took our emergency management staff here from Horry County through a training event and kind of demonstrated our abilities, what we're able to bring in as resources, and began to see that partnership develop. And so we, at that point, decided that was the direction that we'd like to go and offer. Outside of times of disaster, Impact brings in volunteers that serve families all throughout Horry County. We replace roofs, make home repairs, and build handicap ramps and painting. So it was a natural fit for us to coordinate all these many volunteers that are responding teams coming to our aid in a time of disaster as well. In order to manage all these 2,000 plus volunteers that come for each year and these agencies, we developed a website that we could host here locally, that we could coordinate all the teams when they're coming, when they're leaving, where they're staying, their skill set or ability. And we created a website here called disasterhelp.me, disasterhelp.me. Your employees, as employers, you'll be able to help your employees and being able to get them to this website so that they can ask for assistance. During each of the last hurricanes we've had, we have over 800 families that respond. They go there and they can ask for assistance for us to be able to come out there. The people that we bring into town, we have assessors that will go out and visit your home and make sure the request that you've made is what is needed. If you say you've got a 3-inch tree and we get out there and it's really a 30-inch tree, I need to send one of the teams out there with a bobcat so we can actually physically lift it off the house, cut it, then remove it. We have office managers that we bring in that assist us to coordinate all the teams, chainsaw teams, taking trees off homes, off of yards, then we pile it at the street. We have tarping teams that come in. We do mud out or muck out of flooded homes. Then we come in and do mold remediation spray once we've mudded them out and let them dry. We do rebuild, but most of that will take place months after we get all the mud out done. We have cook teams that we can bring in. Most people don't realize just here in South Carolina, we have 3 cook teams that we can bring in from South Carolina that can prepare 80,000 meals a day. So this is how we're able to take care of the residents throughout the county. We cook these meals and then put them on the Red Cross trucks and Salvation Army trucks, and they're delivered out to all the communities. We bring in ham radio operators. Some of you may have seen those huge towers that fell there from the hurricane. When a county is completely without communication, that's where our ham radio operators come in. So we bring all those guys in. We have water purification. We even have babysitting units. When the moms and dads, your employees, are going in to fill out FEMA forms, we're able to set a trailer outside. It's got all the kids' games and things inside. We put a band on the mom and a band on the child, and that way we're able to match them up for safety. They go in, fill out the forms, come back out, and then we're able to match them up again, and they're able to leave the site from there. So in order for your employees and families to get assistance, they'll have to go to our website, disasterhelp.me. There they'll fill out the form, let us know specifically what it is they need, and then we send the assessor out to their home to take a look at it. Once their home's been reviewed, then we'll send out the appropriate team to do the cleanup based on what our assessor found. And whether it's a level 1, you've got to have power reestablished to your home. So I got to get a chainsaw team out there or else you can't get power back. Or whether you just have branches in your yard. For you, that may be a priority 1. You want those branches cleaned up, but it may not be necessary to get the power back on. So we have to put those in order. Once we complete your family, one of your employees, then we're able to turn that over to our partner agency, Catholic Charities here in Horry County, and they'll do the case management to make sure that we get your family everything that they need, whether it be food or temporary housing if your home's inhabitable, whatever it may be, so we can get you back on your feet as quick as possible. If you go to the website, and I'm sure some of you jumped over there now to the disasterhelp.me site, you'll see that it looks a little bit different right now and will over the next few months than it would in times of disaster. In a time of disaster, when you go right on the homepage, the very first thing you'll see is sign up for help. That's where families will click to sign up. There's also a volunteer site. You can click that button. It'll let you fill out a form, tell us what your skill set is if you have a set, or if you just want to volunteer, your times you're available, and we'll be able to place you on the volunteer teams. But for right now, we're in the middle of a fundraising campaign trying to build a facility here in Horry County where we can host these 2,000 volunteers that come every year. Most of our churches where we put volunteers right now, they do not have fire sprinkler systems. Their windows are painted shut, and we realize that's not a safe environment. So as quickly as we can, we're trying to get this building built where we can host these 100 volunteers every night, have a place for them to shower, prepare meals. That way we can take care of your families that are employed by your businesses all over the county. The great news is we've already raised $215,000. The tough part is we've got to raise $330,000 more by Christmas of this year. That means 67 businesses making a $5,000 donation. We launched just 3 weeks ago, and we've already got 5 donors stepped up, and over 3,000 has been raised. So it's a great website. It does a great job of being able to communicate to our residents and homeowners and business owners. This is the place that you can get help during the midst of a hurricane. Just like I said, right now it looks a little bit different, but we've got some great businesses stepping up all over the county, jumping in to be partners, and that we can get this thing started under construction in January and be done by next May, so we're ready for the next hurricane season to help families. If you got any questions, you can leave them in the box below, and we'll be glad to answer those.
Awesome, and thank you, Todd, for that overview. Ed, are you ready to give us an update?
Yes, and I'm kind of the nerdy guy, so I've got graphics. Is that all right if I share my screen to do that?
Feel free to share your screen. I'm assuming you're a pro at Zoom by now.
Oh, we're going to find out here in a second. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yep, I can see it. Looks good.
All right. All right, thank you. My name's Ed Piotrowski. I'm the Chief Meteorologist here at ABC 15. This is the studio I'm in here, and we, of course, get hurricanes here, and some are worse than others. And over the past 5 years, we know all too well how devastating a hurricane can be, especially when it comes to rainfall. But there's more than just rainfall when it comes to hazards with hurricanes. So I kind of want to look back at the last 5 or so that are on the top of everyone's mind and give you an idea of what happened during each one of those. I'll be pretty brief. It's only going to be about 5 or 6 minutes or so. But Hurricane Florence, of course, everybody remembers that. It was all about the rainfall, basically a tropical storm moving through our area back in 2018. But remember, it was only moving at about 3 miles per hour as it moved through Horry County. Literally took almost a full day. And that produced a tremendous amount of rainfall. We set records for the most amount of rainfall from a single tropical system. Loris picked up nearly 2 feet of rain. And when you look at the records, that is the most rainfall from a single tropical system since 1950, shattering the old record set by a tropical storm that moved through the upstate of South Carolina back in 1995. And for those of you that are longtime residents here, you most likely remember Hurricane Floyd and all the flooding that followed Floyd. In 1999, at that point, it was the record setter. But we've had a lot of big rain events over the past several years. But there are wind issues as well, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. All that rainfall sent our rivers, I should say, to record levels, records that were set just 2 years prior to Hurricane Florence with Hurricane Matthew. So 2 catastrophic floods in the time of 3 years is pretty impressive. That, of course, led to an unbelievable amount of flooding. This is the Rosewood community out near the Intracoastal Waterway, and this was a scene that was played out in many communities, especially near the rivers, that actually flooded and stayed in flood stage for quite some time. But you can see how devastating water is. You can pretty much hide from the wind, but you can't hide from the water. It gets in every single nook and cranny, and it just does a tremendous amount of damage. You pretty much have to replace everything from the water line down when a hurricane of that magnitude with that kind of water actually comes through. In terms of Florence fatalities, we had 52 in the Carolinas and Virginia, 9 in South Carolina, but this is probably the most shocking statistic, is that more people actually are dying after the hurricane or even before the hurricane, outside of the hurricane itself. People overall do a pretty good job of getting themselves prepared and hunkered down during a hurricane, but they're not nearly as careful after a hurricane. Sometimes we have medical issues such as heart attacks, auto accidents. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a big, big deal. 2 of the 5 people that died in our area during Hurricane Florence actually died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And we all remember Hurricane Laura just about a week ago made landfall. 8 of the 15 deaths in Laura are attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning. So more people are dying of CO2 poisoning than did during the actual storm itself. So all these things that occur after a hurricane are very important to be on guard for as well. During Florence, we had 5 deaths. I talked about the 2 near Loris who died of carbon monoxide poisoning. We had 3 others that were related to the floodwaters out near Nichols, and of course, 1 in the western parts of Georgetown County. Hurricane Michael that same year was not a huge rainmaker because it was moving so fast. This one was a tremendous wind and storm surge producer. Hurricane Michael post-storm was upgraded to a Category 5 hurricane. So the max winds were 160 miles per hour, and that came through between Panama City and Mexico Beach. And this is what a Category 5 looks like when it comes ashore. Of course, you do get some heavy rainfall, but typically it's not flooding rainfall. In this case, just like with Hurricane Hugo, the storm was moving fast enough that most areas got less than 8 inches of rain. There wasn't much actual freshwater flooding, but you can see the damage that can be done by very strong winds. And that can happen in a Category 1 hurricane as well. People often fear the 3, 4s, and 5s, but I'm going to show you a statistic here a little later on. The Category 1s can be incredibly damaging, and they are deadly as well. Again, this is out near Mexico Beach. You can see how high the wind is. Then this is actual storm surge flooding. This is not rainfall. This is the Gulf of Mexico taking over Mexico Beach. And on top of that storm surge, which was anywhere from 5 to 10 feet, if not higher, you've got battering waves that are doing a tremendous amount of damage. So storm surge is nothing to mess with. Most people do a good job of moving away from the coast. And it's a good thing because this is what it can look like afterwards. In this case, looked like a 30-mile wide tornado had moved through parts of the panhandle of Florida. So incredible damage done with Hurricane Michael from the wind and the storm surge. Last year, of course, we had Hurricane Dorian. You can see the eye wall there near Awendaw. And then it takes a hook to the north and east. We were not in the eye wall for Hurricane Dorian, so we were spared the worst of that hurricane. But remember, a hurricane's not a point. We had a lot of wind and we had a lot of rain. It just wasn't as bad as it could have been in our area. Storm surge was not as significant as it was with Hurricane Matthew, but still, down in Litchfield Beach, the ocean reached the dunes and came through in between some of the homes and, of course, into the streets as well. So storm surge is another big deal. Tornadoes as well. We were on the north to northeast side of Dorian at one point, and tornadoes in tropical systems typically are pretty short-lived. By the time we get a warning that a tornado is seen on the radar, by the time we see it and can actually get on television to warn you if we're not in wall-to-wall, the tornado can come and go. This particular tornado up in North Myrtle Beach literally was on the ground for only about a minute to a minute and a half, and the gentleman who took this video caught the entire thing from start to finish. They're pretty brief. Brief doesn't mean non-damaging. In this case, that brief tornado did cause some damage in North Myrtle Beach, but thankfully nobody was injured and nobody was killed. So tornadoes, wind, storm surge, and very heavy rainfall, the 4 components of a hurricane that can produce a tremendous amount of damage and actually kill people as well. Dorian's rainfall, we had over a foot of rain in Litchfield, but leading up to Hurricane Dorian, we were pretty dry, so we didn't have any significant flooding like we did with Matthew and, of course, Hurricane Florence. So Dorian, for the most part, and I would imagine Randy would agree to this, behaved like a normal hurricane that we had in the mid to late 90s where they were kind of in and out of here pretty quickly. They didn't meander around, got hit, moved on, and we recovered fairly quickly for most of those. Peak wind gust on the beaches were in the 60s with Dorian, 30s and 40s farther inland. Now let's talk a little bit about Isaias, finally learning to pronounce that correctly. Isaias was another hurricane that was moving pretty quickly. You notice north-northeast at 22, so rainfall was not a big deal. We didn't have a tremendous amount of flooding anywhere. And the worst of that hurricane, even though the eye wall, if you can see my cursor here, the eye wall was actually over eastern Horry County. But the worst of it is actually to the east and northeast of the actual eye itself. I actually plotted the peak wind gusts for Isaias, and you can see west of the eye itself, western eye wall, we only had winds gusting in the 50s, but along into the east of the center, we had winds in southeastern North Carolina gusting in the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s. So literally, if that hurricane was about 15 to 20 miles west of where it went, we would have had much higher gusts, especially over the northeastern parts of Horry County. So you can see how difficult my job is to be able to tell you within 15 or 20 miles where a hurricane is going to be 5 days out. That's impossible to do, and that's why it's a fluid situation all the way up until landfall many times. Of course, we did have some storm surge flooding, some locations on the south end. This is pretty typical in Garden City, but especially even in a winter storm, we can see some of the water come ashore here. But the storm surge with Hurricane Isaias was a little lower than it was with Matthew on the south end, but from what I'm hearing and from some of the observations I've seen, it may have actually been right at, if not a little bit higher, on the north end of the Strand up near Cherry Grove. Hurricane Laura, a Category 4 hurricane, was on the verge of becoming a Category 5, made landfall in Cameron, Louisiana, produced a 15 to 18-foot storm surge, but Lake Charles, where they thought the water could go 30 miles inland, was spared because, once again, this storm actually went about 15 miles east of where it was projected to go, and for that reason, they never got the incredible flooding into Lake Charles. But they did get 132-mile-per-hour wind gusts with a tremendous amount of wind damage there. And here's just some of the damage that was done in Cameron, Louisiana. And again, you see how powerful a storm surge actually is. Water is a very, very powerful force. It can wipe homes off of their foundations, right off of the foundation cleanly, while others can be left somewhat intact, not necessarily inhabitable, but still at least standing. So this is a scene that could very well play out along the Grand Strand someday. We hope it doesn't. It sort of did with Hurricane Hugo, even though Hugo went south of us. We had a lot of damage in Garden City from the storm surge, which was close to 13 feet down in Garden City. So it's possible, and it will happen again. We just don't know when it's going to happen, this year or 50 years from now. So far, we're up to 15 named storms, and we're only halfway through the season. That's more than we get in an entire season. And if the forecasts are correct of 24, 12, and 5, you do the math, we've got a long, long way to go with still many hurricanes and tropical storms to go. We're just now getting into the peak of hurricane season. September by far is the busiest month of the hurricane season, September 10th being the peak. When it comes to most active seasons, if the 24 named storms is realized, it'll be the second busiest hurricane season since 1900. So not the kind of record we want to break at all, that's for sure. So we're already at 15 named storms. We only use 21 letters of our alphabet. So what happens when we run out? We actually break out the good old Greek alphabet at that point, and we've only done that one other time in our history, and that was back in 2005 when we had those 28 named storms. In that year, we only had Tropical Storm Ophelia brush our coast, so we actually made out pretty well in what was an extremely active season. And if we can not have another tropical storm or hurricane hit us this year, we'll have escaped relatively unscathed here as well compared to other locations along the coast. The primary reasons that we're into a very busy hurricane season, we're in a La Nina or very close to that. That's when the waters cool off the South American coast. And that decreases the wind shear. And when it decreases the wind shear, it actually increases tropical activity. Not only is the wind shear fairly light, you also have incredibly warm water across the Atlantic. Everything you see in the yellows, oranges, and reds indicating water that's above normal from Africa all the way to the Lesser Antilles and off the southeast coast. The only area that's blue is this area in the Gulf of Mexico, and you probably have guessed that's the upwelling from Hurricane Laura and Michael. That water is still recovering at this point in time. So we're into the peak now. The 51-day period from August 20th through October 10th are the 51 busiest days of the entire hurricane season. September 10th is the historical peak, but we can't let our guard down after September 10th. Really, the big hurricanes that we've ever had have occurred after that date. Florence in 2018, Floyd in 99, Hugo in 1989, Matthew was in October of 16. Of course, Hazel, October 15th of 1954. And unbelievably, we've actually had a Category 2 hurricane hit Garden City on Halloween. Extremely rare to see anything like that happens. As Randy and I have talked about for years, basically from August 1st through October 15th is when we have to worry the most. After that, hopefully things improve dramatically. What's going on out there right now? Nana, likely to become a hurricane as it makes landfall near Belize sometime on Thursday morning. It will die out over Central America, so it's not coming to the US. And Omar, that formed off the Carolina coast, is headed on out to sea and will likely lose its tropical characteristics over the next 24 to 36 hours. Couple of disturbances out by Africa, kind of up in the air as to which one may develop. If they do develop and if they're going to impact the United States, we're still probably 12 or 13 days away from that. So now's the time to definitely be prepared. And remember, this time of the year, you can't let your guard down. You have to be vigilant. You may look on a Monday that there's a tropical storm out there and you think, it's just a tropical storm. But literally a couple of days later, it could be a massive hurricane. And that happened with all 4 of the Category 5s that have hit the United States. They were just tropical storms 3 days prior to making landfall as a Category 5 hurricane. So keep that in mind. The good thing is Cat 5 hurricanes making landfall are very, very rare. But Category 1s, you can't take lightly. Since 2010, we've had 175 deaths and $103 billion in damage from just a Category 1 hurricane. Remember, the category is based on the wind speed, and I've already described the many different hazards associated with a hurricane. It's not just the wind. So always focus on the hazards, not the category, because if I had told you in 2018 that it's just going to be Tropical Storm Florence coming through, nobody would have thought twice about the fact that it's just going to be a little bit of wind, no big deal. But because we described the impacts of catastrophic rainfall, people were more prepared for that. So again, focus on the hazards. And that's it for me, just to make sure everybody is prepared.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we'll follow it up with Randy and Courtney before we head into a Q&A. I know we've gotten a few questions, so we will get those answered right after Randy and Courtney give us a little update on their end.
Hey everybody, Randy Webster, Assistant County Administrator for Public Safety, as well as still Emergency Management Director here in the county. And it's a real pleasure to be here today, talk about this, follow up with Ed and the rest of you. And I just want to start out by saying what O'Neill said to me is about the most important thing you can do for businesses is insurance, insurance, and insurance. I see a lot of this happen over the years since I've been doing this, and that seems to be the biggest struggle, is how do small businesses get back in operation? And you all know that small businesses is our backbone here in Horry County. So we're very aware of that, and we take that into consideration on everything we do with our planning, as well as when we have to start making recommendations for evacuations or those, anything and all that's going to impact the economy and life safety here at the county. So, but that said, let's talk a little bit about changes for this year in the COVID environment. We've been talking about this for a little while, and it will impact your employees as well as your family, your friends, yourselves. When it comes to evacuation orders that are issued by the governor in one of the 3 or all 3 of the evacuation zones, the key to now is COVID. And what do we do about COVID? So first and foremost is, we're working with the Red Cross and others to create safe environments for sheltering. But that's very difficult considering social distancing, the PPE that's required, or personal protective equipment. And so overall, our numbers, so to speak, or our capacity limits have shrunk about 2/3. So we're only able to put about 1/3 of the folks in sheltering that we would have been able to outside of a pandemic. So we have both plans in place now, but also Red Cross is encouraging folks to either shelter in with family, friends, other locations, and really use the congregate or the schools as a final place to go if you don't have any other choices. Because once you get in there, all the particular COVID precautions will be taking place. PPE or masks will be issued if you don't have them. And it's just going to be a tough environment to get in. But that's where we are. I was closely watching what happened with Hurricane Laura in Louisiana and Texas, and heard a lot about sheltering not happening in counties now. And we've seen that in other areas too. So I hope we don't have to get to that at some point, but we do want to be able to provide what base shelter or safe sheltering that we can in a COVID environment. So it's that much more difficult. But also we started last year and with this year, we started really after Hurricane Florence, and one of our lessons learned, so to speak, that we do after every event. We had the same problem in our Emergency Operations Center when we understood now what wind loads really are and how they really impact buildings. Our Emergency Operations Center only has a wind load for the roof of 100 miles per hour, sustained winds. So we started looking at that across all the shelters that we use and found similar problems. for various hosts of reasons that's what it is. So we've had to make some tough decisions regarding available sheltering for category 2 and higher storms, and we don't have the capability right now to house folks in these shelters when those storms are potential impacts to Horry County. So you really have to pay attention this year and next few years for sure about what your preparations are, how you're going to help your employees prepare. This is another added anxiety to the hurricane preparation and response and ultimately recovery on how we're going to take care of ourselves, our employees, our families, our friends, and things of that nature. So obviously there's a lot to talk about this, but you can get more on our website, emd@horrycounty.org, and we can give you a lot more information on preparation and things like that to be ready. Also on the business side, it's been talked about, but make a plan. You need to have a plan. You need to know what's going to happen. We've talked years and years and years about the evacuation and the need to be able to get businesses back up and running as quickly as possible. But one way that you can do that is make sure you know who your essential employees are. And once the evacuation order has been lifted and it's been deemed safe to start letting folks back in, we do have a reentry plan that's recognized and used across all jurisdictions in Horry County. It's coordinated at the state as well. So if people need to start, when they can start coming back into Horry County or start moving around in the areas of Horry County, we know we need to get folks back into the businesses so they can do the assessments, understand what needs they have, work with the insurance adjusters. But there is a methodical piece to this, and we want utility companies to come in to re-energize the electrical grid and get the repairs made. We need to get the debris off the roads. We've got to do search and rescue of these places, looking for people who did not evacuate or who may have found themselves in a precarious situation. So, all that comes to play. But we know, as I said earlier, that small businesses are our backbone, and we want to understand how to get folks back in here. So having people know that there'll be the essential employees coming back, have their name on your letterhead, your company letterhead, and then when it's, they're presented at the checkpoint, if there are checkpoints set up, then it makes it a lot easier for the law enforcement officers there to allow folks back in. Be reminded, just as you'll have adjusters come from all over the place, we'll have outside resources coming from all over: law enforcement, first responders, fire rescue, building code officials, all kinds of folks coming in to help us in Horry County. So they're not going to have a clue necessarily who you are or what your business is. If it's an officer that typically lives in Greenville and they're stationed here and said, you don't let anybody through unless they have these types of credentials, then that's the credentials you need. And that's all in our reentry plan as well. And all this can be found on our website. Again, take inventory, know what you've got, know who your suppliers are. I can't stress enough as well as make those relationships now with your restoration companies. Once again, most businesses fail within 5 years of a disaster like this, so we don't want that to be the case here in Horry County. Other thing you can do with your employees is just walk through some scenarios. It's not just hurricanes we're working with. We've got tornadoes. We have, winter storms that can be very tough on us in this area, ice storms. We do have occasionally opportunity for a tsunami, believe that or not, and we've had them in this area tens of thousands of years ago. So there's nothing to say it won't happen again. And that's the key, especially when I was watching about Hurricane Laura, was talking about that was the worst hurricane to hit in, almost 150 years or something. But that tells me one thing: it's happened before. And we don't know what's happened beyond the records in the 1850s. But I will guarantee you none of this is new. So we're just seeing it new from a whole different perspective because we're in these areas now that years upon years ago, no one even knew it had happened. So it's just understanding that these things are going to happen. They're going to happen each and every year. It's just, is this the year that we're directly impacted or not? Let's hope not. Let's hope it never happens, but it might. A couple other quick things for you on evacuation zones. Remember, there's zones A, B, and C, and those orders will be issued by the governor, and it will be mandatory when that happens. And then, we'll be set up in the Emergency Operations Center in Conway at the M.L. Brown building and monitoring everything that's going on. Of coordinating with municipalities, coordinating with state level, federal level, and just be able to, respond to all the needs that we can, and then be able to coordinate the relief efforts, the recovery efforts. And Todd's groups are just amazing what they do, and he helps coordinate them coming in. We could not have any of this happen without the work from that volunteer groups who support our community tremendously. And everybody that's listening in today or watching on this today, you all have a very, very important role in getting this community back up and running. And we all recognize that our job is to help facilitate that, and let's get us through the worst part as quick as we can and start stabilizing the economy. Let's stop the disaster from happening and then move forward to our rebuild. Just know it's going to take a long time. So pretty simple for me at this point. We hope that we don't have another impact this season, but our website is full of information, emd@horrycounty.org. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. So we'll be pumping out information right and left as events start to happen. And let's just hope we don't have one this year or for years to come. So that's really it for me. So I'll turn it over to Courtney.
Thank you, Randy. Hi, I'm Courtney Frappaolo. I'm with the county and the Community Development Director. And part of our mission in our department is to help our residents recover more quickly from these storms and flooding. And as Ed indicated, we just have a large number of storms that are impacting our region through the last 5 years. It just keeps coming and coming. And with that, our ability to recover is stifled, and it just becomes more difficult each time there's an event. And so the county asked the state and FEMA after Florence to help us, because mitigation and resiliency really was happening at a state and federal level. And we really felt that after these events, we needed to focus on it at the kitchen table level and bring these planning exercises and discussions about mitigation and resiliency down into neighborhood conversations. And so FEMA provided us with a grant, the county, and we've begun those efforts. And really, our goal is to help our community respond more quickly and recover more quickly, specifically here from flooding events, because that's really our compounding issue, that many of our communities just continue to flood now, really not even when there's a major hurricane, just a major rain event can cause some flooding in neighborhoods. So we're working on those efforts and looking at it kind of in a two-pronged approach. The first is trying to look at best practices around the country within these riverine communities to develop policies that can help us build and create more resilient neighborhoods. And the other is infrastructure projects, and what can we do on an infrastructure level to help us become more resilient. And this slide here shows a couple of ways that happens. When you're talking about projects, we're looking at property acquisitions. It's those buyout programs that we talk about. How do you get neighborhoods out of harm's way, and how do you do that in a comprehensive fashion? We're also looking at how do you elevate, how do we need to raise roads, and what kind of drainage improvements do we need to develop. We've been talking about this since the end of 2019, and I think that the first answer is that there's not one solution that will assist our entire community, that it's going to be several different components that have to happen comprehensively. At the same time, there are a number of policies that need to be addressed that we can create to help reduce our risks. And so, next slide, please. This is just a slide to show you what some of the resilient neighborhoods look like. So as a part of a buyout program where you're moving people out of harm's way, The idea is then to look at our land use and say, okay, how do we utilize this land to help and become a mitigation measure? So you can see here where we're creating some drainage systems, some stormwater systems that then would help those who would remain, hopefully mitigate their flooding. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another important part of that is communications and helping our residents understand risk and our business community understand risk. So we've been working on this twofold as a part of this strategy. The first is our Resiliency project website. And there is a number of videos from our virtual webinar series that has just a plethora of knowledge from our technical experts that are federal, state, and local experts. And in particular, the folks from SBA did a presentation that provides resources both post-disaster, but also related to the pandemic. And there was just so much information that they provided. I would recommend that you hop on to that webpage and check that video out. We're also working on making sure that that residents and businesses can go onto our platforms, and instead of looking for FEMA flood maps and pulling information on land use in different locations, to try to pull all of that information into one comprehensive format so people can understand, I live in this area, is the surge going to be, you know, in what zone am I in? Am I going to be vulnerable to certain things, flooding, the surge? And really try to make and create a tool that would be useful to the community. Those really, I think, are probably our biggest initiatives that we're doing right now as a part of the resiliency planning. We began it last year and will continue it through the fall, continuing discussions both with our neighborhoods and our other key stakeholders, as well as our council members. We'll be talking a lot about that. So if you are interested in the resiliency plan and would like to receive updates, you can go to that webpage, the Resiliency Project, and there is a listserv that you can join and you can sign up for updates there. I think that's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you both for those wonderful updates. I know one of our questions was answered from Randy's presentation. So at this time, we're going to move into our Q&A. So if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to throw them in the comments or the chat here. I know there was a question, I believe, for Ed regarding naming of hurricanes and storms. And the question is, why do they not use the entire alphabet when naming storms?
Good question, and from everything that I've heard from the National Hurricane Center and the World Meteorological Organization, who actually names them, when you get to U, X, Y, Z, and Q, there just are not very many names that begin with that. So you have a tendency over the course of 150 years to run out of some of those names. And a lot of people don't know that the naming system from the World Meteorological Organization is based on the countries that are most impacted by tropical storms and hurricanes. And if you think about that, that's the Caribbean Sea, Central America, Mexico, and the United States. So when you see the list of names, they typically are of English, Spanish, and French origin. That's why we get some crazy names, at least crazy to us, but it's perfectly normal for folks in the Central America and in the Caribbean islands to be like a John to them. And some of our names, I'm sure, are quite strange to them as well.
Awesome. Thank you for giving us that answer. I also did wonder that. I'm going to give people just another moment to see if there's any additional questions. You all did a fantastic job just explaining from each of your industries updates on the current status of our hurricane season, as well as how COVID-19 has impacted us and will impact us in the case that we have to make a move in the next 6 weeks or so. All right. Randy, can you touch on the OPCON levels, please?
Sure, absolutely. So OPCON levels are used to describe where we are in a particular time as a response to any disaster that may be unfolding within Horry County or within the nation. It's actually a grouping of letters 1 through 3, or numbers 1 through 3, that really sets the posture for where we are. And it's also coordinated at the state level as well as the federal level through FEMA. So we start with OPCON 3, which is everyday activity, just like today. And if you recall, a month or two ago, we actually dropped to OPCON 2 due to the pandemic that was going on at the time, or still going on, but the early stages of it. So it's not just hurricane related. It's any potential disaster that could unfold or might be unfolding. So we start at 3, normal operations. We do move to 2, and that's more of a heightened level of awareness. And what I hope that people have started to understand is when we start make the announcement we've gone to OPCON 2, that should be a flag to everybody in the community that something's up, that we need to start paying attention to what's going on, because the county's moved to OPCON 2 for some type of reason, and potentially hurricane related or other event that we may not be paying attention to right now. So, but OPCON 2, what that does for us, it changes the way county government operates just a little bit. It does open the Emergency Operations Center if necessary. It does activate our comprehensive emergency management plan, which is then what the county starts responding from and using to work itself through whatever disasters unfold. It could be natural disaster, it could be man-made disasters, it could be civil unrest, it could be a lot of things, and our plan covers all of these events. So, and then when we get to OPCON 1, I usually say for folks that remember the Cold War era, you never wanted to get to DEFCON 1, which Defense Condition 1, which was World War III. We don't like getting to OPCON 1 because that means something's going on and we don't want to have to work with. Typically it's because we've evacuated for a hurricane, now we're waiting on the impacts, or, but in some cases it may be the fact we go from 3 straight to 1, such as a tornado comes through off of a system and wreaks havoc through a lot of areas of the county. We have to jump right into it at that point. There's no build-up time or ramp-up time involved. So, but that's what we use. That's what they're for. It's to gauge where we are in any given day on our disaster response readiness and how we as county government then start ramping up or responding to events as they unfold. And it's the same when we go to OPCON 2, so does the state, and potentially so does FEMA. And then when we go to OPCON 1, so does the state and so does FEMA. And it just helps that coordination and that pipeline and conduit, and keeps everything flowing in the right direction, and simplifies a lot of things that we do in order to make quick decisions and get quick reactions and quick responses.
Thank you for that. That was a great explanation of all those levels. There is an additional question. Some of the flooding in the Rosewood communities that has happened throughout the years has been blamed, on North Carolina opening their dam. Is this true, and does this have an effect on us? I'm not sure if anyone knows particularly about this situation and can speak to it.
Yeah, I can take that one. So there's been a lot of study done lately, and there's been a lot of discussion about that very issue. And we worked with Duke Energy, and they've been here to a presentation with County Council a month or so ago. And this is a big area, a big floodplain, and they don't necessarily release the water that creates the dam here. The closest dam that they have, Blewett Falls, is not even a dam like that. It's a wall, a weir, so to speak, and then the water runs over top of it when it gets higher. They can't control it. They do not have flood control dams on the river, on the Great PD. All theirs is hydroelectric generation, and it's totally different type of system. So unfortunately, the water does come this way. It does get into the Great PD, does get into the Winyah Bay, and then does, as a matter of course, start backing up. And then so does the Waccamaw. The Waccamaw doesn't have dams on it, so it's just the rainfall in this area. And I think the best thing that I've understood most recently is when you look at the topography of Horry County, the highest point of Horry County is in the Loris area, and everything else is downhill. And it runs either toward the Little PD, Great PD, or toward the Waccamaw, toward the coast. And the elevation, so to speak, over the course of the Waccamaw River is about 10 feet or so. And there's exact numbers there, but there's very little. So for it's flat. That's the whole point. It's flat. And the water has nowhere to go but out. When it goes above the banks, it goes out. And it's just unfortunate. That's the way it is here. It's the low country. And that's, that's part of the reason why. And so all the rivers, so there's 5 different rivers that all come into either Georgetown or Horry counties through either Great PD or the Walkable. And that all ends right here. So we're just on the downhill side of all the water. And the Great PD actually runs into the Yadkin, which runs into Virginia. So that watershed is huge. And so it's just a very unfortunate situation. But there's no one particular thing that's causing it. It's a combination of everything. And flat terrain is the biggest problem.
Thank you for answering.
Yeah, and I just want to add that if you go to the resiliency page, there was a great presentation given that talks about the topography and how some of the localized flooding happens and why it seems to have started with the severe storms from Joaquin through current. If you go to that archive of videos, I think it was the one on August 12th, that really goes through some of those issues. So if you're interested in some of that, I would recommend that you go there and listen to some of the science behind why this is continuing and a compounding problem.
Good point.
Awesome. Thank you for letting us know about those resources. Thank you again to all our panelists for participating today. I know I learned some great information, and I hope everybody watching did also learn some great information regarding disasters planning and the resiliency efforts after such events. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and we will see you for our next webinar soon.